Justice. It's one of the biggest elements to any story of good against bad. Depending on the type of conflict, it either goes from justice to others or justice for oneself. In JoJo, it's the most common conflict of the Joestars versus Dio, but how it all works out, it's a lot different when it comes second time around. This all begins with Jonathan Joestar against Dio in part 1. The relationship isn't as blatant as many try to make it out to be. Dio suffering from the way that life had treated him had caused this inferiority issue, and the pain of not knowing genuine good after the death of his mother had created this character to be seen as entirely evil when that really wasn't the case. Then there's Jonathan being the product of Dio's energy towards the world, and in the case of being left behind that his father puts onto him when Dio was adopted. For all the evil that Dio commits when the part goes further on, Jonathan leaves it to himself to be the one to stop Dio, and while Dio has done all of these things to Jonathan, the time spent between the two and the pain of being unable to be the one to change Dio is what's weighted onto Jonathan. And Dio carries this massive respect for Jonathan since he's aware of him being the one that pushed Jonathan enough to cause his growth as an individual. It was a completely different take on a situation similar to what Dio had faced, and he was the reason for it. The efforts made between the two was a constant fight for the top, and it was great because of one being lower than the other was actually the drive to push that same one to the top, but the outcome was an inevitable fate. Jonathan didn't have to go and try to stop Dio, but to him, he did because he felt like he was the only one to truly take Dio out. All of the Hamon warriors can attempt to try to take Dio out, but none of them had shared the experiences that those two had shared, and probably wouldn't do so well against them. Plus, even if they did go without Jonathan, the battle wouldn't carry any weight because of what we had built up, obviously, which is what makes this next area interesting. The Stardust Crusaders against Dio is obviously iconic for the franchise, but the weight held for it originally isn't made to be as strong. Once the characters are established, it makes a lot of sense for it. Jotaro and Joseph have a direct issue if Dio is to continue to live through Holly. Kakyoin, Polnareff, and Avdol, to nearly the same extent, have personal reasons too, which make their ties a lot more important than characters like Dyer or Straits. But the thing is, it's more so treated as a final boss that needs to be stopped than anything. None of the Stardust Crusaders care about who Dio was before, nor could they know, because the only person that knew the true issues with Dio is Dio, and the only ones that attempted to carry the weight and neutralize Dio's mindset is Jonathan. Dio doesn't hold any respect for Jotaro or any of the Stardust Crusaders, and while they do try to stop him, the Stardust Crusaders aren't something that constantly tower above Dio after he gets ahead of them too. Let me show you an example. Let's say Death Note, because the effects are a lot easier to see here, and I understand it's crazy to be like, whoa, Death Note spoilers in a JoJo video, but if you have seen the franchise, it's great, you can stay here, but if you haven't, I really do recommend it, and you can click off if you want to. You have our, in quotes, good character against our, in quotes, evil character. The fight between the two is a constant fight on who can get ahead of the other and stop them before it's too late. People can try to stop evil, but their efforts will most likely fall flat on their face because of the gap between normal people and evil. Good is the one that needs to stop evil the only way they know how. And once that it looks like good had finally finished off evil, evil wins. But now instead of fighting good, evil must now deal with the descendants of good. An interesting comparison here is that you have the emotional descendant and the ideal tough-willed descendant. Both are very intelligent. At this time, evil has matured and got a lot to work with, but now they're missing something that made them as good as they were when they were fighting against their equal. But without that in mind, it seems that the descendants can't pose that much of a threat, so they don't deal with it directly. Evil tries to have others deal with the descendants, but to no surprise, they were destroyed and unable to do anything when it came to the end. Boom! And that's how you line up JoJo's Bizarre Adventure with Death Note. Who the fuck else would do this? But on a serious note, for those that have watched both, you can understand where I'm going with this. It's argued that Death Note After L was a lot and possibly just even worse for it because of the lack of contest and weight to the battle. When it comes to the Joestars versus Dio ordeal and the need to stop him, it's not made as strong when it's done with the Descendants because of how it's made out to be with Dio. To Jonathan, Dio is a completely unfortunate kid who's now a product of how his life was originally and someone to be stopped so that he doesn't make the world worse for it. To the Stardust Crusaders, Dio is just another evil that needs to be stopped. This also transfers over into Death Note with L's understanding of Light's simplistic take on what's right and wrong and how truly smart he is. To Nier, by directly quoting him, Light is really just another serial killer. It probably doesn't help that Light and Dio both acted completely insane when they had thought that the cards were on their table, and they kind of gave a reason as to why people think that they're just what they are, instead of thinking that there's a lot more to them. That's why taking on the mantle is a lot different than being the ones there, because you're going to interpret your justice a lot different than the original case. With the case of Stardust Crusaders, the stop to Dio is a stop to evil, and there all that goes. It's not until part 4 and then on that Jotaro actually sees how Dio's ties ran deep inside of the world, which caused Jotaro to look more into people and understand that there's a lot more than what he originally believed. While it doesn't give him a reason to believe that there was more than he should have looked into Dio for, it makes him understand the mind of the believer and potentially get an idea of what Dio was like originally. This also was supposed to progress into my topics of justice in the 2, 4, and part 5, 6, and then on, but I guess I'll be saving that for later because that's a lot to go over in one video. So for now, take this part as the first part being the Dio area of it all, and we'll be going over more later on. So thank you all for watching. I understand that this is like, oh yeah, it's an analysis video, it should be really long, and I'm just like, that's not really the case. If I can get my point across, then I think I'm pretty much done with the case. Don't you think so? But thank you all for watching. Hopefully I'll see you on the next one. Again, this is my first sign of showing Death Note and stuff, because I'm just like, man, maybe I should really start incorporating a lot of what I have already watched previously into stuff that I do now. So yeah, maybe we'll see me going over Monster and Kira Yoshikage, probably John Leobert and Yoshikage Kira parallels or something like that. No, I'm kidding, but potentially. Well, yeah, we'll see. So thank you all for watching again. Hopefully I'll see you all on the next one. Until then, peace out and Godspeed.